So the Centre of Volunteering acknowledges the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which our office stands here in the Rocks in Sydney. We recognise the importance of their connection to place and community on these lands and pay respects to their elders past and present. And if you would like to share where you are coming to us from today in the chat, please feel free. It's always nice to see that. So please, feel free to do that. So I would like to also start by thank you, Luke, introducing myself. I'm Diana Piper. I'm probably known to many of you. Aisha and I present, we take it in turns to present the overviews of the national standards of volunteering. And then these are followed by Kylie, who does a more in-depth case study. Kylie Elliott from the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation is very well placed to do this because she has achieved the national standards for volunteering. And so she is able to give some more insights and in a more in-depth way as to how she went about achieving each standard. So today we are up to standard number 6 out of the 8. So we're getting to the end, which is great. And it is all about workplace safety and well-being. And it's a fairly short standard today, isn't it, Kylie? So there's only 3 main points. So, it may not take us as long to go through them, but the idea is please feel free to pop some questions in the chat if you'd like to. If there's something that you would like to bring up during the presentation, we can I can check that question for you and bring it to Kylie's attention. We can do our best to answer it, but also we'll have time for questions at the end of the session as well, so we can have a discussion. Please feel free to join in that at the end of the session, because it's always interesting to hear people's different views on each particular topic. So I'll hand over to Kylie in a moment, but just as a reminder, there are other sessions over on our website, of course, which you can join in. So they're loosely connected with each standard. So please feel free at the end of this to jump across onto our website and have a look and see if there's anything else you'd like to register for. And keep in mind that if you can't attend at the actual time of the presentation, if you've registered, you will receive a link, with the recording and slides. So please feel free to do that as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Kylie, and we will have a look at standard number 6.
Thank you so much, Diana. I really appreciate it. So yes, up to number 6. We're over the halfway mark, and this one's a very important one. It's about workplace safety and well-being. So this standard is the health, safety and well-being of volunteers to make sure they're protected in the workplace. So workplace safety and wellbeing ensures that the organisation includes volunteers in its health and safety procedures and recognises duty of care to volunteers. So meeting this standard assists the organisation to meet its obligations for the health and safety of volunteers, manage risk and provide a supportive and responsive workplace for volunteers. This is a really important one. This is one of the first ones using, as I did, using these standards as a roadblock or as a road map or a frame for building a volunteer program. This should be probably one of the first ones that you should look at to make sure that your volunteers are working in a safe environment and their needs, that their well-being is important. So standard 6, as Diana said, it only has 3 points to that. So health, safety and well-being of volunteers is protected in the workplace. So 6.1 is about the effective working relationships with employees and between volunteers, and that they are facilitated by the organisation. So it's not up to the volunteers or up to the staff. The organisation also takes some importance and ensures that this is being met. Processes, so 6.2 is about processes are in place to protect the health and safety of volunteers in their capacity as volunteers. And 6.3 is volunteers have access to complaints and grievance procedures. So 6.1, so if this is your first time looking at these, the way we do it is we'll go into each point and then how we met the standards. Just feel free to stop me at any time. I can see this stuff in the chat, but I can't see the chat. So if you just put your hand up, stop me, or just come off mute, that would be great. So 6.1, effective working relationships with employees and between volunteers are facilitated by the organisation. So structured processes are in place for relevant staff to communicate and or meet with volunteers. So where requested, volunteers are provided with opportunities and resources to meet collectively regarding their work with the organisation. So the evidence we used to meet this standard was we uploaded the SCHF orientation and induction policy, the SCHF grievance policy, the SCHF volunteer policy, the SCHF WHS management system policy, the WHS communication policy, and also a volunteer insurance policy. So they're the evidence that you had to show and how we met it. Let's have a look. So how we rose to the standard that volunteers are part of the team. So volunteers are celebrated annually. So at our volunteer thank you event, where staff attend to network with volunteers. By saying that, we have a really big turnout of at our annual thank you event from our staff. It's not just a couple of people come. We usually have a minimum of 30 staff that will attend that. Any department or program that has anything to do with volunteers will be very well represented at the thank you event to talk to the volunteers and get real feedback. And they, you know, our CEO, Christina, she was at the thank you event, stayed to the very end. We have formalities that last only no more than half an hour, and then the rest of the night is just about networking. So it's really important. It's a really important day for the volunteers and for the staff too. So volunteers inside the office are supported to meet with relevant staff and interview them and learn about their roles and experiences at SCHF. So that's, you know, we're starting with some more office volunteers. We've got, I think, 36 interviews next week for volunteers. It's not just those sort of volunteers that are working in our office, it's also our work experience, because they're still they're volunteering as well. We put them sort of into that. And the same with volunteers and work experience and anyone that's coming in to our team. We actually have like a workbook where we'll encourage them to interview at least 15 staff. If they're only coming for a week, or, you know, if it's a new admin person, at least 15 staff from different departments that I will organise those meetings. And they're just asking a few set questions. So the staff know what the questions are coming. It's things like, what does your team do? What do you do? How did you, what sort of experience did you need for your job? Or, you know, what do you like about your job? And then the staff will ask the volunteers questions as well. So we facilitate that communication, just the start of it. And then we find it's a better working relationship. Also, new volunteers, we're just putting on a whole heap of, in our 3 offices, we're going to have at least 2 to 3 volunteers that will be in our offices. So we'll have profiles up about them. It's not just about what their work experience is, but also about fun facts, what they like, and you know, icebreakers that we will send around to all the staff with their photo. So get to know you. So it's really important that they are part of the team. So volunteers are always briefed before each event or in the office and advised about why they are volunteering, how their work will impact SCHF and SCHN. So SCHN is a network, which means the hospitals, and who they'll be working with. So it's not just I'll come in and brief them. They'll also be introduced to the other team, who else will be working with them, and anyone else that will be working with our volunteers is encouraged to go and speak to the volunteers as well. Staff are briefed prior to each event with volunteers, which includes how to support the volunteers and how to interact with them. So I've just had a staff briefing, just prior to this meeting for the City to Surf, and explaining to volunteers what the volunteers will be doing, and the expectations of staff and how they will communicate with the volunteers is really important. And then admin and virtual volunteers meet collectively to discuss their work and their experiences at SCHF. So it'll be a regular once a month meeting just to see how everyone's going, any suggestions, any roadblocks, that sort of stuff. So 6.2, processes are in place to protect the health and safety of volunteers in their capacity as volunteers. So health and safety management policies and procedures include volunteers. Volunteers are insured for personal injury and liability. Volunteers have access to the same post-incident debriefing and support provided to employees. Expectations and limits of volunteer roles, including time commitments and any designated hours, are agreed with volunteers, and individual workloads of volunteers are monitored and managed. So the evidence again was SCHF orientation and induction policy, a grievance policy, a volunteer policy, the WH&S management systems policy. As you can see, you'll see this theme. There's the volunteer policy, and then, you know, we also have in all of our SCHF policy, if the word staff there's always the word volunteers right next to it, because our volunteer are just like our staff. And we'll have WH&S inside our volunteer policy, but we probably don't even need to, because it's all through, and same with our grievance policy, it's staff and volunteers as well. So how we rose to that standards, volunteers matter. So all SCHF WH policies include volunteers. SCHF has volunteer insurance. Volunteers and their families are included in the SCHF EAP Employee Assistance Program. So that's also not just for volunteers, but for volunteer family members as well. Volunteers are always asked for feedback post-event to ensure their needs are being met and they understand the impact of their work. Every event, doesn't matter if they're only coming in for a couple of hours or a couple of days or a couple of weeks, everyone has the opportunity to send in feedback. We ask feedback from them. We do it verbally as well at the end of every event, but we also send them a link that they can fill out at their own leisure. It's not compulsory. It's totally up to them. So all volunteer roles are recorded in the SCHF CRM, and SCHF follows all safe work practices and ensures volunteers' work does not replace a paid role or is not more than 16 hours a week. The paid role stuff, I always get questions on that with staff because now they're terrified and they're like, and I said, you know, they can do like part, but you can't ask me to get a volunteer to come in and take a coordinator's role because a coordinator's left or a coordinator's going on holidays. But they could do part of their role to help them. They could support it, but we can't take the place. So I love the fact that I get asked that question because it means that it's important to our staff. So it's just important to have those sort of conversations, and then you'll see, you reap the rewards like I am 4 years on down. People are still asking me every time just to make sure that they are doing the right thing. So 6.3, volunteers have access to complaints and grievance procedures. So volunteers are given information about how to make a complaint or raise a concern with the organisation and to relevant external bodies. So grievances from volunteers are managed consistently, transparently, equitably, and in line with the principles of natural justice. So again, it was the same things. It was the SCHF orientation and induction, grievance policy, our volunteer policy, the management system policy, communication, and volunteer insurance. So this one, volunteers are supported. So we talked about it in last one, if you're in the last standard, about we're currently creating an easy to read and understand document for all volunteers. It's called the SCHF Volunteer Promise. It's a combination of the staff code of conduct, bullying and harassment and grievance policies, mixed in with the SCHF values and real examples of how volunteers align with those values. It's a promise for all volunteers and SCHF staff working alongside volunteers.